So what follows now is a brief overview of two of the earliest civilizations in Western history. If you have taken a class on the history of the world, part one, then you're familiar with some of the main issues we're going to cover here. If not, then this might be a little introduction. Again, your textbook, McClellan and Dorn, are going to go through a lot of this history. We're going to hit some of the highlights, particularly those that relate to early science and technology wherever we can find it. So we're going to start with Mesopotamia and Egypt. You've already seen this map, and this is just to get us sort of oriented in the world. And so this map features the places on the globe where organized agriculture began. Agriculture, animal husbandry, settled living in cities and other places happened. And so where we're headed is here to Western Asia. Many argue that this is the very first civilization in human history. This is ancient Iraq and Iran, ancient Syria. Here we are. And so that's where we're headed first. Often called the Fertile Crescent. And that's because this region here, this green space, if you will, perhaps not as green as the map might suggest that it is, but this green space follows this great river civilization, this great river valley, the Euphrates, the Tigris, who have their origins up here in the mountains of Anatolia. This is Anatolia, this is modern-day Turkey, have their origins up here, and those rivers flow down to the Persian Gulf. Called the Fertile Crescent because if you want to get from east to west in Asia, you typically follow these river valleys. You could go across the desert if you know what you're doing, but basically you follow this general trajectory. And as you can see, if you know a little bit of your map, and this one up here gives you a better indication of the globe as a whole, if you want to get from Asia to Africa, you're going to go through this region. If you want to get from Europe to Africa, you're probably going to eventually get through here. So a very important crossroads, if you will, of the world. And one of the places where we can practice archaeology today, but agriculture back in the day, and we can actually have a thriving civilization. So, one of the first civilizations in history, Western Asia, the origin also, as you know, of the Holy Lands, this region right here. So a very important region in the history of the world and in the history of science and technology. We have a few notable leaders coming out of this region, and so I give you just a quick background here. McClellan and Dorn talk about that it's important for leadership in an area to sort of sponsor, to patronize technology, scientific inquiry when we start to see it. One of the earliest rulers mentioned by McClellan and Dorn is Sargon of Akkad, and probably around 2300 BC we can see evidence of him. This is a very impressive bronze statue of him, just the head I'm afraid. His eye looks like someone got angry with him, but no, that's probably just an accident of survival. So, but that is a significant blow. So this region here in the northern part of Mesopotamia is where his kingdom was. We think his kingdom lasted maybe about 100 years. So the reason I bring that up is that it seems that the groups who develop in Mesopotamia fiercely independent of one another. Some dozen city-states, the term is city-states, some dozen cities that were themselves their own state develop here in this river valley. But Sargon was able to pull it together for a little while. Also, during the time of Sargon, we get the first evidence of our first great epic literature. One of the elements of the history of science and technology is the development of writing. Right? Writing is a technology itself, right? It's a communication technology. Writing is a technology itself, but with writing you have the ability to record observations. You have the ability to record inventories, to record calendars. And so for the very first time we start to see writing, and we think it is out of Mesopotamia. And one of the first things that they do write is this great heroic epic of a fellow named Gilgamesh who challenges the gods, who challenges other great heroes, if you will, and also takes on challenges associated with resources. There's this one story of him fighting a great forest monster in order to bring back lumber, wood, for his civilization. As you probably know, this region of Mesopotamia, this region of the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, doesn't have a lot of forests. And so one story has Gilgamesh, a great king, a great leader, going off fighting some great enemy whom the epic calls a monster, in order to bring back timber, to bring back lumber for building. So great stories. This image here shows Gilgamesh and one of his sidekicks, a fellow by the name of Enkidu, taking on a divine, if you will, beastie. The gods were not happy with Gilgamesh at one point, and so they sent down the bull of heaven. In the end, Gilgamesh actually defeats this beast as a great affront to the gods. So the heroic here in Mesopotamia emphasizes leadership, challenging the gods, challenging great monsters in exchange for resources. So that's very interesting in our discussion of science and society, to think that the heroic sort of challenges the status quo, challenges that which people believe cannot be challenged. Another great leader of Mesopotamia is a fellow by the name of Hammurabi. And Hammurabi comes along in the 18th century. And this map is meant to show you that he was, while Sargon typically unified the northern part of Mesopotamia in the 2300s BC, in the 1800s BC, some 500 years later, Hammurabi unifies this region, the more southerly region. So this is modern-day Kuwait and modern-day Iraq here, the southern part of Iraq. And this darker area is meant to show that his headquarters, if you will, the center of his power, was here in Babylon. Let me get back to Hammurabi for just a moment. Hammurabi, also very famous for using that technology of writing to craft the first law code for this region. So not only can writing be used to keep records of celestial events, as we may imagine, say, at Stonehenge, but writing could also be used to keep records of law. So if you think of law as a technology, law as a unifying principle of some sort, here in Mesopotamia, we think for the first time with Hammurabi we get this recorded. Just as in Stonehenge, we mentioned before that monumental building is an important aspect of early history, and this is what remains of one of those building projects. This is the ancient city-state of Ur, and this is basically what remains of a ziggurat. Ziggurat, a large mud brick building, wider at the bottom, narrower at the top. This one looks a little strange. But that is basically wind and rain erosion. These bricks are made of mud. They can erode, right? And so this one is in the process of being restored. Here's another image of a ziggurat, and fascinating look, right? You can actually go in, but this one has suffered, look at all these curved edges. This has suffered wind erosion, rain erosion, but you can see the layers of bricks that have been built up, right, to create this grand building. And I like this image because it does have some people in the foreground, so you can get an idea of how large this is. Again, this down here, this is new stuff, you might imagine. This is new concrete fortifications to try to keep this ziggurat in place. But you must imagine that it used to cover just far more acres. And what's left here is this unusual sort of modern futuristic shape. Looks like something out of Star Wars, doesn't it? But it's old mud bricks, and so you can see that they've just been eroded away by wind, by rain, to create this amazing shape today. So we can only imagine what they used to look like. Speaking of imagining, here is an artist's understanding of the great ziggurat at Ur, and here is another restoration project. As you can see, they're trying really hard to recreate what it might have looked like with these great staircases coming up. So here we have the idea, and so it's kind of like a birthday cake, right, or a wedding cake with tiers, a very broad solid tier at the bottom, and then smaller tiers the higher you get. So kind of that pyramid shape, which we see very commonly in many ancient societies because that's the easiest to build, but also quite complex. We think that only the priests we're allowed to go up here to the top, that maybe this is where most of our religious sacrifices were made, but clearly also this is where the observations of the heavens were made as well. So if you can imagine being out at night at the top of one of these things, you don't have to worry about light pollution as we do today. You'd be able to have a fantastic view of the heavens, especially at night. Yeah, I threw that one in there because this architectural form is still around today. This is the state capital of California. This is Sacramento. And so you can see that same sort of wider at the bottom, narrower at the top, ziggurat approach to modern day architecture. Fascinating that they would choose this kind of shape, isn't it? And here's our Hammurabi. Hammurabi from the 18th century. And here he is. This is Hammurabi over here. And this, the god Shamash. The god Shamash. You know that he's a god because if he were to stand, he would just tower above Hammurabi, right? He's seated and he is handing over a scroll. He is handing over a law code to Hammurabi. And that is the source of law for the people of Mesopotamia. Here, written in cuneiform at the bottom, is the actual law code of the Mesopotamians. And speaking of cuneiform, here is an example of cuneiform. If you have taken a look at the video in this content folder, and you should if you haven't already, the history of writing, very fascinating, and one of the earliest technologies for civilizations, alongside pottery, alongside textile and other technologies. But writing, a very important technology. The whole idea of being able to express both sounds and concepts in pictographic form. First with pictures, as we said, but then also eventually, as the video on Alphabet will suggest to you, trying to craft just the sounds so that an alphabet could be used with any language. Cuneiform, pictographic, much like hieroglyphs in Egypt, and primarily cuneiform associated with the cultures that created it. Later on, when we transition to alphabets, as the video will suggest to you, an alphabet can adapt itself to multiple languages. You know that yourself from modern day experience. And this is just a nice presentation on cuneiform itself. And again, your video talks to you about transitions in writing. But for example, if we could take a look at cuneiform, we think the earliest forms of cuneiform here, it's actually a picture of what looks like a fish, right? And over time it develops to this. And then you're thinking, wow, over time, why is that a fish? Well, it still has a general shape, but what seems to be happening, as the video suggests to you, is that we want to write faster, we want to write quicker. And so the pictures don't really work anymore. We've got to come up with more symbolic expressions of the original picture so that we can write faster. It looks kind of like, what can we call it, ice cream cones or something with a top, wider at the top, narrow at the bottom. That's the writing utensil itself that kind of made these wedge-shaped marks. Again, if you're watching your videos on the number 1, you're watching your videos on the alphabet, some of this will be familiar. If you've not seen those, please get after it. Same can be shown for this image here of a foot, right? Down here at the bottom, this looks like a foot. It kind of changes a bit. And that still sort of looks like a foot, but when we get to writing faster and faster, here's what we start to see. It's more characters that are easier to present quickly. The other uses for writing, we've talked about irrigation, and your McClellan and Dorn will spend some time talking about what they call the hydraulic hypothesis, right? The hydraulic hypothesis. Learn that. It shows up on a quiz. The hydraulic hypothesis that suggests that when we organize people around a technology, such as irrigation, that's really going to have a huge impact upon the way that society develops. Hammurabi's code deals with laws on irrigation canals, how you can and cannot use those canals for your own benefit to maybe destroy someone's farm south of you if you're upstream and they're southerly and downstream perhaps. So this is a English representation of a cuneiform map that shows irrigation, right? Irrigation. These are these are canals, irrigation canals, and then we're also marking fields. So this is the field of a priest. This is a field between the canals, and this is the field associated somehow with the palace, so the king. This one is marshland of the town Hamri. This is the field of Marduk, so this field is dedicated to the god Marduk. This is the field of the gate of the city, right? So maybe the person who manages the gate, this is the field he gets to work, or for some reason, the produce from this field goes to maintaining the gate. These are just individuals. Mutbilu, Ludu'u. So there you have it. There's a wonderful use, a wonderful example of irrigation and using cuneiform to explain an irrigation map. Over here we have an archaeologist trying to recreate the various fields and irrigation canals in a model. Oh, your McClellan and Dorn will also talk a little bit about art and culture and craftsmanship. And I throw these in just to give you some idea of stoneworking that's happening. This is supposed to be perhaps an individual living in Mesopotamia. This is a fantastic beard. Most Mesopotamian humans depicted have rather large eyes, and these eyes seem to have a spiritual component. Excuse me, they certainly evoke some kind of emotional component. And this is just a nice bronze bull that has, again, very pleasing lines to it. Other images from Mesopotamia. I'm no artist, but you can get some idea of the craftsmanship, you can get some idea of the interests in art. This is a female, a woman, you can tell no beard, lovely dress, but again, these very prominent eyes. This interesting looking woman is also has the feature in that she is functional. This is a picture of some sort. This is a gate. This is a doorway. This art embellishes. Also from Ur, often called the Royal Standard of Ur. And what we have here are workers working on textiles. So some idea of textiles as a technology. We have folks coming in with fish right here. That's this fellow right here. So he's walking in some kind of presentation or a parade of some sort, but also with animals. It may be that we're bringing resources for sacrifice. It may be that we're bringing food to pay our taxes. And these fellows have some kind of twigs or something on their backs, maybe for fuel. And then some small donkeys or ponies in procession. Again, a very prominent eye. Also, you might be thinking, oh, this reminds me a little bit of Egypt. Yes, this sort of two-dimensional art, early art in Mesopotamia, also very reminiscent of early art in Egypt. Well, speaking of Egypt, we need to head there. We've been in Mesopotamia looking at sort of an overview of Mesopotamian history, sort of its leadership and some of the evidence that helps us understand some of the technology of writing, some of the technology associated with engineering, monumental building, etc. So we now need to go to Egypt. And as you know, Egypt down here in northern Africa, very near to Mesopotamia, very much near that Fertile Crescent.